But I want to look at Matthew chapter 27 with you tonight, and we want to begin reading at verse 27 and get you into the flavor of what is taking place in the scene and bring you down into about the beginning of verse 35. So Matthew chapter 27, beginning at verse 27, moving you through into verse 35. Before we read the word, let's pray together. This scene, Lord, wouldn't be so heart-wrenching and disturbing if my face wasn't in the crowd. But the truth of the matter is, I was the one that was yelling. And well, yeah, I wasn't there 2,000 years ago. I was there in 2011. And what they did, I've done. And what they're guilty of, I'm guilty of. And their intent has been my intent. And I am so sorry. Would you give me new insight? Would you grip me in a new way? Would you take me beyond all of my religion? And would you bring me into your heart, that you and I might be best friends, yea, closer than best friends, that we might be lovers, intimate, one, that you might be such a vital part of my life, that in a real sense you would be my life, and that I would know truth not because somebody told it to me, but because you and I have been together. You and I are together, and your mind has become my mind, and I know the truth. So speak to us tonight. Speak to me tonight. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Thank you. Matthew 27, verse 27. Then the soldiers of the governor took Jesus into the praetorium and gathered the whole garrison around him. And they stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him. And when they had twisted a crown of thorns, they put it on his head and a reed in his right hand. And they bowed the knee before him, mocking him, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews!" Then they spat on him and took the reed and struck him on the head. And when they had mocked him, they took the robe off from him, put his own clothes on him, and led him away to be crucified. Now as they came out, they found a man of Cyrene, Simon by name. Him they compelled to bear his cross. And when they had come to a place called Golgotha, that is to say, place of a skull, they gave him sour wine mingled with gall to drink. And when he had tasted it, he would not drink. Then they crucified him. Verse 32. Now as they came out, they found a man of Cyrene, Simon by name. Him they compelled to bear his cross. A little nervous about this tonight. Wanted to give you my testimony. I don't know why you'd want to hear my testimony. I'm just an average kind of guy. Among all the Jews of the world, I just happen to be one of them. I'm not rich. I am a businessman. We're not poor. We've had enough money to bring the family every year down to Jerusalem for the Feast of the Passover. We couldn't come to all the feasts because that would be too many trips and it would be too expensive, but we did set this 1 week aside and make the trip. Got 2 boys. They're dandies. And they've grown up coming every year this 1 week down here to Jerusalem. And we've celebrated the Feast of the Passover together, and it's really been neat. And every year families come from all over the world to gather in and to experience this Feast of the Passover for this week. And you get to meet these families, and my boys have met boys from people all over the world, and it's really been neat, and they've developed friendships, and every year they look forward to seeing them. They only get to see them once a year, and that would be during the Feast of the Passover, and so my boys have really looked forward to it, and boy, I determined I'm going to do this every year that they might experience that. And the way I pulled it off, actually, is made some business contacts. Hey, in Jerusalem, in the area, so I could do some business while I'm here and pick up an extra little money to pay for the trip on my way down. So I've been doing some business, and what happened this year, I'm not sure what happened this year. It's really been a mess. Jerusalem hasn't been the same this year. The Feast of the Passover is a celebration. I mean, the crowds are all there, and everything's going high, and people are partying, and we all get to see our friends, and it's really been neat, but every year, but there has been like a shadow over this week. There's a lot of trouble. You see leaders of Israel running around, and there's stuff going on in the background. Didn't want to get involved in it, kept my head down, man. I just, it's family time, it's the outing, it's vacation. We deserve all the religious festival and all the part of the religious part of it, but hey, it's really just our family, and we had a great time. This particular day, I headed out of town. Had to go outside of Jerusalem for a little while. Business, one of the business deals. And I promised the boys I'd be back at such and such a time in the afternoon, and we had this outing planned, and they really look forward to it. It's what we do. Well, we've done this particular thing every year that we've been here, and they're really looking forward to it. And I don't want to disappoint the boys, and I don't want to be late. And the business went a little longer than I thought, and I'm coming into Jerusalem, and as I'm rushing through the gates of Jerusalem, I know how to get there, of course, and I make a right turn, and I go down this street, and immediately I knew I shouldn't have gone that street. Should have gone one more down. Oh, man. As I came down this street, can you believe it? There was this massive, overwhelming crowd coming right at me, and in the front of this crowd, there was no way to get through. In the front of this crowd were these Roman soldiers, man. And you don't mess with them, I'll tell you that. And these guys were coming, and they had in between them and right behind them this Jesus person. He was carrying this cross, and obviously they were taking him out to crucify. And they had this big sign that one of them was carrying. This is Jesus of Nazareth. And I didn't get much into the sign, but I did get captivated by the face of Jesus. His beard was just yanked out by its roots, and his face was just mutilated. His eyes sunk into his skull and just all puffed out like they'd beaten him nearly. His hair was just saturated with blood, and a lot of it just dried. And he was stumbling as he carried this cross, and he'd carry it a few feet and stumble and fall, and they'd pick the cross up and crack him with a whip, and he'd go a little further and fall. And hey, I knew I wasn't going to get by that crowd. I knew that. So I ducked into the shadows. It was a doorway, and just hid back in the shadows of that doorway. And hey, I let him pass. I looked at my watch. Oh, man, this could take 2 hours for them to go by. I'm going to be late for the boys. They're going to be aggravated. My wife's going to really be upset. This is such an inconvenience. Can you believe this? Why I had to come down this street. I could have gone a street down and been, if I'd have just, but here I am stuck, and I'll just have to, I don't have time for this. Brother, well, I'll just wait it out. Jesus kept falling, picking it up. They'd pick him up, pick the cross up. He'd stumble, fall again. Every time it took a little longer for him to get up, like he was getting weaker all the time. And when he got right in front of me, he fell, and he didn't get up that time. And the Roman soldiers came over and grabbed that cross off his back, and one of them picked him up and slapped him in the face a little bit and got his attention and finally got him to his feet. And they looked around like they were looking for somebody to carry that cross. But I was in the shadows. They weren't going to find me. And then that Roman soldier looked me square in the eye. I knew I was in trouble. I don't have time for this. This is such an inconvenience. Why does this kind of stuff have to happen to me? forevermore. I said, hey, And that wasn't going to go by. He wasn't going to let me get by with that. He pulled out his sword. You don't mess with these guys. He put that sword on my shoulder, man, and I knew I was in trouble. This is such an inconvenience. Why did I have to? This is not fair. Why did this happen to me? I don't have time for this. I don't know what you'll think about this. But that's a part of my testimony. See, I'm beginning to wonder, as I look back on this whole scene, I'm beginning to wonder, it was such an inconvenience. I don't have time for this. My boys I'd set the schedule. We were going. But see, I begin to wonder now if maybe an inconvenience isn't an inconvenience at all. Maybe it's a divine act of God. Because do you understand, my whole life was changed out of what I thought was I don't have time for this. Why does this kind of stuff have to happen to me? And it was in that kind of a setting that God got through to me, and I got confronted with a cross, and Jesus literally captured my heart, and my life was changed, my family was changed. It all came out of do you suppose an inconvenience is not an inconvenience at all, but it's the divine hand of God intersecting my life? But think about it. If God wanted to intersect my life, wouldn't it always be an inconvenience? I mean, I'm so busy and there's so much to do, and we're going here and we're going there, and anytime he intersected my life and stopped me dead in my tracks, wouldn't it be, I don't have time for this. This is not, why does this stuff happen to me? So I guess I'm proposing to you tonight that maybe an inconvenience isn't an inconvenience. Maybe it's the divine hand of God trying to talk to me. As I look back on that whole scene, one of the things that startles me, this is amazing, is that whole thing was about, can you believe this? That whole thing was about prophecy. Do you realize everything that was going on? Oh yeah, it says it in verse 35. They divided my garments among them. For my clothing they cast lots. That was spoken by the prophet. That this whole thing was about prophecy. That I was participating right in the middle of prophetic speaking. That hundreds of years earlier, there was a prophet who spoke about all of this. And I got right in the middle of that. And while I was standing in the shadows, man, tapping my what? I don't have time for this. Prophecy was taking place, being fulfilled. And I got to participate in it. And I was... You know about prophecy. Prophecy, fulfilled, is the fulfillment of the plan of God. That hundreds of years before, God has this unfolding plan and talks about it. And then when prophecy is actually fulfilled, it's the plan literally coming to fruition. And I got right in the middle of that plan, and I was... Do you realize in the Old Testament there's 332 verbal predictive prophecies about Jesus? 332 verbal predictive prophecies about one man. I'm not talking general prophecies. I'm not talking general kind of stuff. I'm talking specific, nailed down, detailed stuff. Do you know the possibilities of all 332 verbal predictive prophecies all taking place in one single man? Somebody figured it out. They said the possibilities of 332 verbal predictive prophecies taking place in one man would be the probability of 1 out of every 8. Wait a minute. 8 with 100 zeros after it. It's probably more money and it'll come in the offering tonight. Can you imagine? 8 with 100 zeros after it. In other words, it's absolutely impossible for this to take place. And yet here it is, right in the middle of this scene, verbal predictive prophecies taking place, and I got to participate right in the middle of the unfolding, moving hand and plan of God. And you know what I was doing? I was standing in the shadows saying, oh, I don't have time for this. This is such an inconvenience. Why did I? If I had just gone one road down, I could have. Oh, brother. And I would have missed. There's not only the verbal predictive prophecies, there's this symbolic predictive prophecies. That is that God literally took this stuff and just wove it into the fabric of everyday life. So every time we did this stuff, it yelled at us about his plan, and it was all going to be fulfilled sometime. We offered these sacrifice lambs time after time after time after time. And do you realize every time we did it, it all pointed to one thing: Jesus, the Lamb of God. And I'm standing back in the corner in the shadows saying, oh, I don't have time for this. And I got to carry his. I got in on the unfolding plan of. I participated in the redemption of the world. Now, I know my name wasn't ever spoken. I realize that. Hey, I wasn't in the prophecies. I know that. But I got to be involved in the unfolding plan of God for my generation, for every generation, as I carried. And I was in the corner saying, I don't have time for this. This is such an inconvenience. Why does this have to happen to me? And God was intersecting my life and pulling me right into the fulfillment of his plan and to redeem a world. And I was, what's wrong with me? Do you suppose an inconvenience is not an inconvenience at all? Do you suppose it's God literally intersecting my world, pulling me into his plan? And do you suppose while I'm standing in the shadows, I don't have time for this? Why does this stuff have to happen to me? He's wanting to use my life for the fulfillment of his dream? Could it be an inconvenience is not an inconvenience at all? Could it be that an inconvenience is really the hand of God intersecting my life dynamically, pulling me into his plan to fulfill redemption for a world? Another part of my testimony is found in that word compelled. Do you see it in verse 32? Now, as they came out, they found a man of Cyrene, Simon by name. Him they compelled. It's a word that's strong in my native language. Yeah, the idea of compelled is really strong because it's the idea of forcing someone into. That literally what it's telling you is that somehow while I'm standing back in the shadows, he's literally reached out and grabbed a hold of me and forced me into. Hey, I didn't plan any of this. Come on. I didn't get up in the morning and say, oh, I hope I get to carry a cross today. I mean, come on. I got plans, brother. I'm going, I got business and then the boys, and I don't have time for this. Come on. I'm a real person. I'm not some fictitious thing. Don't think this is just a story I'm telling you. I'm not a Mother Goose rhyme, a cartoon character. Listen, I'm a guy from Cyrene. Our town was really popular in my day. Come on. It was a learning center. We had philosophers who actually taught there, lived in Athens, came down and taught there. Come on. Hey, we were a prosperous city. We were just off the coast of Africa. It was a successful commerce place. Come on, we had a whole group of Jews. A lot of us traveled together to come down for this Feast of the Passover. This was a big deal. I'm not some fictitious character, man. I've got a past. And as I look back in my past, I begin to see the moving of the hand of God preparing me. And you think I was in Jerusalem accidentally? Come on. Don't you see that years before God had set that up, strategically manipulated my life, given me this desire? It was the boys, it was all together, and literally drugged me into this seat. Don't you think I went outside of the city for business just by accident? You think I met that guy? But just come on. And I came into the city just at that moment, made that right turn. If I'd have just gone, if I'd have been 10 minutes, think I'd duck back into the shadows of that doorway? Oh, I don't have time for this. This is such an inconvenience. Do you think all of that was accidental? Don't you know that the divine hand of God was moving in my past, bringing me to this? Do you think this just happened? Oh, come on. Could I try to convince you tonight that an inconvenience is not an inconvenience at all? It's the unfolding of the plan of God for a man's life, and that he's literally dipped his fingers into the middle of my... Can you believe it? I griped. I complained. I bellyached. You know what they did? Soldier took that knife and that sword and put it right on my shoulder. And man, I didn't have any choice. And hey, I bought new clothes to come to Jerusalem. You know, the business thing. And I had on my new jacket. And oh, brother. And he picked that cross up and put it on my shoulder. And, of course, all of the blood from Jesus and all that what I described earlier got all over that cross. And now it all transferred to me. And my jacket was ruined. In fact, they began to treat me like a criminal. I didn't do anything. Wasn't my fault. I had to carry that cross, and they got carried away, man. They began to crack their whips over my back. People were throwing stuff at Jesus. They began to throw stuff at me like I was guilty of something. I didn't. Come on, guys. It wasn't my fault. Sweat and the grime and the blood. By the time I got done, I had to throw my clothes away, man. Why? Do you suppose, can you grasp this? That maybe an inconvenience isn't an inconvenience at all. That it's God literally intersecting my life, trying to tell me something. And what I've been griping over and what I've been complaining about and what I've been belly aching over and saying, oh, why does this? I never get the breaks. Is an opportunity of the participating in the unfolding of prophecy. In the redemption of a world, and that God is trying to say something to me. Oh, one other part of my testimony I want to tell you about is the conclusion of it all. I don't know what happened to me. I was under that cross, and they were dragging Jesus behind me, and I couldn't get away from there. When they finally nailed him, laid him out, and nailed him, and hung him, and it just... He began to talk to me. I can't tell you. I don't know. Can't describe it. I just know when I got out of there, my life was totally changed. But see, wasn't just my life. Changed my family. Mark wrote about us. Yeah, Mark wrote about us. Here's what Mark said about me in Mark 15:21. Mark said, "Now they compelled a certain man, Simon a Cyrenian, the father of Alexander and Rufus." Those are my two boys. Alexander and Rufus, my two boys. Oh, I'm proud of those boys. I'm so embarrassed because I was standing in the shadows of that room, of that doorway, pounding my watch, saying, I don't have time for this. I never get the breaks. Why does this? And I didn't have a clue that what I was going to participate in and that inconvenience, what I thought was an inconvenience, literally was going to change the life of my boys and my wife. Oh, you probably don't know. The Apostle Paul wrote in Romans 16:13, he said to the Romans, "Greet Rufus." That's my boy. He said, "Greet Rufus, chosen in the Lord." My boy. You think that would have happened if hadn't have been in a... And what I thought was an inconvenience was an overwhelming hand of God literally intersecting my life and changed my boys. In fact, let me tell you what else Paul wrote. In that Romans 16:13, he said, "Greet Rufus, chosen in the Lord, and his mother, and mine." My wife got so close to the Apostle Paul, he considered her his second mom. You know where that came from? I never get the breaks. This is an inconvenience. I don't have time for this. This is, oh, brother. Could it be that an inconvenience is not an inconvenience at all? It is the divine hand of God intersecting my life, trying to talk to me. And he's dragging me right in the middle of a cross that I might embrace him and my world might be changed. And do I have the nerve to stand? Forgive me, Jesus. I have a big addiction in my life. I'm absolutely hooked, dominated and controlled. Can't seem to stop. This addiction has so overwhelmed me. It's the addiction of griping, complaining, belly aching. I'm so stuck on my own pattern, so stuck on my own schedule, what I want, where I'm going. And every time you intervene in my life, it's such an inconvenience. But then, God, how would you get to me? How would you talk to me? Could I seek you tonight? And could I look at the circumstances in my living? Could I look at a soldier who's pulling out his sword and tapping me on the shoulder? Could I see him as an instrument of the divine? Could I see what I don't like in people around me? Could I see what is offensive in those nearby me? Could I see all of those things as the divine movement of God trying to speak to me? Could you save me tonight from my narrow, little, locked-in view of life, me, I, and my? And could you give me eyes to see that you are fulfilling a plan and unfolding that plan, and that the very circumstances that you have surrounded me with could be the very circumstances by which that plan is going to be fulfilled in my life and those around me in this community? Forgive me for my griping. Forgive me for my belly aching. Forgive me for my complaining. Could an inconvenience not be an inconvenience at all? Could it be the divine hand of God embracing me with himself? And have you brought me to where I am? Oh, the marvel of this. Have you brought me to where I am? Have you brought me to where I am? Have you brought me to where I am? Because that's where you are. And you want me. Heads are bowed. How many inconveniences have you had today? How many phone calls have you gotten you wish you hadn't received? How many people have wanted something you wish they hadn't shown up? What are the circumstances that are surrounding you? And you can't figure out why. It seems so unfair. You didn't even deserve it. You didn't plan it. Could it be an inconvenience is not an inconvenience? It's the hand of God drawing you to himself. Would you embrace that tonight? And instead of standing in the shadows tapping your watch, would you participate in the unfolding of prophecy? Plan of God being fulfilled. Find yourself confronted with a cross. And a Jesus who wants to do something powerful through you. Heads are bowed. Any gripers, any complainers, any people who constantly throughout the day are tapping their watch. Anybody here ever said, I don't get the breaks? Isn't fair. Anybody want to embrace the inconvenience for the fulfillment of the dream of God in your life? Altars open.